Enter section number 2, market intelligence. In this segment, we'll learn what market intelligence actually is. We'll learn about the value of positioning and how to leverage market intelligence in your community using that positioning. And then we'll talk about some market intelligence tools to consider as you operate your organization. So what is market intelligence? Market intelligence is the everyday information gathering relevant to a company's market that's been gathered, analyzed, and specifically used for the purpose of accurate and confident decision making in determining a market opportunity, market penetration strategy, and market development metrics. So said simply, market intelligence is all of the information that you can get about making a decision for your community. In fact, I've mentioned this in earlier courses, the competitive landscape for investment and attraction is very high. There are roughly 7,500 investment and attraction organizations throughout the world, so market intelligence plays a critical component in increasing that competitiveness. There's also the need to leverage market intelligence for your investment promotion agency. The reason is, last year alone, there were 15,000 estimated greenfield projects. This means that there were projects built on raw land with no buildings, resulting in $823 billion of investment worldwide. In addition to that, as we mentioned in an earlier course, there's roughly 2,500 location decision makers. So how could you use market intelligence to get in front of the 2,500 decision makers that will help support 15,000 greenfield projects that will result in $823 billion of investment for your community? Another trend that we talk about for market intelligence is global flows of FDI. One of the things that we know is that global flows of FDI fell by 16% in 2017 to an estimated $1.52 trillion. That's roughly down $1.81 trillion from 2016. Now, why is all this important? All of this is important to know the backdrop of how you're going to position your organization. Market intelligence gives you that backdrop. You have to understand what the market is doing. What's your economy doing relative to another economy? What's your organization doing relative to another organization? How is this impacting the global economy? How is your organization or your community affected by global downturns and trends? And are those changes, challenges documented and reflected in the strategy? So what we'll talk about in this segment is brand positioning. This will really help support your market intelligence activities. And I'm going to help draw this out a little bit so we can kind of cover each of these segments. The first thing that we always do in brand positioning is identify who your competitors are in the market. You have to know who you compete with, who you win against, and who you lose to, and you have to know why. If you are losing for a particular reason, a particular sector, you can change your trajectory or the trajectory of your organization to increase that competitiveness. So who are your competitors in the market? Ask yourself that. The next thing that you need to ask yourself are, where are they positioned? Your competitors play a big role in how you position your organization for investment and attraction, and you have to know where they're positioned. The second is, you have to decide on what your positioning is relative to your rivals. Are you the biggest? Are you the fastest? Are you the cheapest? Do you have luxury product? Do you have incentives to offer? What do you have to offer that's unique and valuable that your competitor doesn't have to offer? The third is, look for gaps in the market. Gaps in the market are opportunities within communities or economies that communities and organizations can take advantage of just by finding that gap, marketing to that gap, and ultimately doing a project within that gap. So what are those types of gaps? For some communities, those gaps are specific industries, micro industries, sub-industries, which means industries of industries. For other markets, those gaps are things that are natural resources for your community. Once you have the gap, then you can develop what we call the unique selling proposition. This is something that every community has. It's what makes you stand out or different from any other community. It's like people. We all have different skills, we all have different values, and if you apply that same principle to communities, you'll uncover a unique selling proposition or a value proposition. And once you have your value proposition that stands across or stands out from your other competitors, you can communicate that through marketing, which is what we'll get into in following courses. So what are some examples of how communities develop value propositions? Well, take Sacramento, for example. Sacramento is in a very challenging state to do business, and they realized that the need for value propositioning was tremendous. How were they going to do it? What are the 3 things that they could stand on in Sacramento that could differentiate themselves from other regions? Well, the first was talent, a shared ecosystem of colleges and universities that are some of the best in the world, from UC Berkeley to Stanford, all within a certain area. The proximity to the Bay Area, they have to use assets and a value proposition of talent to support their region. The next thing that they do is affordability. Now, while they are close to the Bay Area, they're roughly 1/3 the cost of the Bay Area. So they then have to use affordability in everything that they do and how they talk about their community. Now, granted, California is more expensive than other destinations, but they're using affordability within California, and particularly for foreign direct investment. So you've seen that they use talent, you've seen that they used affordability, and third, they're going to use connection. So we talked about the workforce, but the connection to the Bay Area, the connection to a university and innovation hub is very important for them. And when you blend these 3 components together, you have a value proposition. Now, how does that look like in marketing? Right? We talked about earlier, find the gaps, fill the gaps, communicate the gaps. What you see here from Sacramento is how they talk about one of their value propositions, or a subcomponent of a value proposition, which is profitability. One of the things that they've said and stated over and over again is companies that locate to California are significantly more profitable, in some cases hundreds of percentage points more profitable than companies that locate anywhere else in the country. So what you see here is how they communicate the most profitable companies in the United States using Fortune 500 rankings. So you can see that California has 51 Fortune 500 headquarters, and that their companies are 2,000% more profitable than Texas companies, 38% more profitable than New York companies. This profit amount includes California state taxes and regulations. Now that I gave you some examples of how value proposition positioning work within a real market, let's give some tools to consider. Now, tools globally range very wide. Some can include government sources, some tools can include private sources. Depending on your location, you can use government sources to report out data, to look at data from where your community stands versus how another community stands. Here in the US, we use the US Census Bureau. We also use the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. These are just some examples of the tools that you can use to gather intelligence about certain markets. Now, there's also private sector tools to consider. ESRI is one of the largest demographic data providers for global data. They do have a lot of data here in the US, but they also have it worldwide. Claritas, HubSpot, or some others to name a few. When we look at market intelligence tools, we also consider some of the things that give us information about the companies that are visiting us. Now, we're going to talk about this more during our digital segment, but I just wanted to show you an example of a market intelligence tool in action. One of the deals that you may have heard of was Mazda moving to Huntsville, Alabama. Because of the market intelligence tools that we had available at the time, we were able to identify that Toyota Mazda was looking at our client's website 3 months before they made the announcement that they were moving to our client's location. In fact, we were able to look at which pages that they went to, how engaged they were, how many times that they came back, and we were able to attribute them coming to the site through our digital marketing. This is one tool that we use to leverage market intelligence for communities. The other tool that we use and we recommend, which is among many other tools that we'll discuss later on, is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a phenomenal tool to gather intelligence about your prospects, about potential companies. And one of the things that you can do that I love with LinkedIn, and I'm going to jump back into the screen here so I can show you some examples, is you can search for companies, you can search for people, you can search based on the connections that you have, first, second, or third connections. You can search on what titles people have, where they're located, if they're located in the US, if they're located in other parts of the world, which companies that they are, and you can start to hone in on your target or your companies because we've already profiled them, right? We learned in the sections prior to this that once you profile a company or create a persona, then you have to go after, you have to communicate with them, and LinkedIn is a great tool that does that for you. Now, this is the basic tool. If you want more information, you can buy the Sales Navigator tool on LinkedIn for a monthly subscription cost. But within a basic tool, just running a site search on site selection, here's all these different contacts that I have. People like Ryan Schultz, who's the Director of National Site Selection for a Greater Chicago company, or Kathleen Newsom, who's in charge of site selection and vendor negotiations for her company. Now notice I only did the search for Chicago, but you guys can do this for targeted geographies that you think would be a good fit for your community. So that was our segment on market intelligence. What did we learn today? We learned what market intelligence actually is. The gathering of information about a community, about a competitor, about a company to make a better, more informed decision for your organization. We learned what positioning does. We learned the context of positioning within your community and how to leverage it for your community. In fact, we gave you one example of what Sacramento did. Lastly, we learned which market intelligence tools to consider.